Hello and welcome to this webinar, counseling session on remedial coaching and its importance. Uh, Rather, the title is quite vivid and clear, importance of remedial teaching. And this has been organized by Debates and Seminar Committee, Government Degree College, Pulwama, and the Remedial Teaching Cell of the college. Before taking you through to the modalities of the webinar, it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome all of you and to welcome Honorable Principal Government Degree College Pulwama, Professor Farooq Ahmed Andrabi, to welcome all the participants from across the country to this national webinar cum counseling session for the students and the teachers alike. It's again a matter of great pleasure for me personally to be hosting this event in these trying times when the realities are naggingly different and are quite far removed from the normal routine before COVID-19 hit us. We are today beset with a lot of problems owing to COVID-19 crisis as a matter of its consequence. In the aftermath of this COVID-19 crisis, we are left with some limited devices at hand. So remedial coaching becomes a necessity. Necessity to the extent that the laid back students are to be brought into the mainstream so that they don't feel cornered, they don't feel any way left behind. Any to please welcome the guests and put in his valuable comments vis-a-vis the webinar. Honorable Principal Government Degree College Pulwama, Professor Farooq Ahmed Andrabi, with his welcome speech.
Your meeting phone check करवाना है
Honorable Principal, Government Degree College, Pulwama, Professor Farooq Ahmed Andrabi, sir, has actually, because of a technical snag, hasn't joined us because a meeting was lined up with Higher Education Department just at 10:30, and he is right now busy attending that meeting. And we're so very sorry that Principal Sir couldn't join us because of some technical snag, and that at the same time we request all the participants to bear with us because of this technical snag. But then this is inaugural session. This is the welcome address. So we request Honorable Principal Sir to be with us, to spare some time with us. Right. In the in media rests in the middle of the webinar, so that he puts in his private comments vis-a-vis the webinar. Well, the webinar is about remedial coaching and remedial teaching. Remedial teaching and remedial coaching are way too different, but at the same time, one, for a loss of a better word, at times puts in remedial coaching in place of remedial teaching. Realities are quite different right now because we are beset with a situation wherein nothing seems, nothing seems to go our way. We are in a situation wherein nothing seems, quite the way we wanted it to be. And well, I was talking about Honorable Principal, Government Degree College, Pulwama, Professor Farooq Ahmed Andrabi, sir couldn't join us because a meeting was scheduled with Higher Education Department just now. So he had to actually take that meeting, and this meeting overlapped with that meeting. And since the call from that was what we call earlier to our call, webinar sooner than later as we move on with our webinar, our processes of the webinar, our practice of the webinar. And as all of us know that this webinar is about remedial teaching, and remedial teaching becomes too very important when it comes to COVID-19 crisis, owing to the reason that COVID-19 crisis has thrown up myriad challenges to us. It's a kind of a situation which is, so to say, a cul-de-sac, wherein nothing seems to be going the way we wanted it to be. Schools have been closed, colleges have been closed, every educational setup has been affected, and you name it and you see that yes, everything that surrounds us has been affected one way or the other. And education is something which didn't remain untouched. It was something which was affected right at the very first jolt. Education came to a standstill, and the students who were till now always eager to go to their alma maters to relish the treat of knowledge, education, or so to say, the allied things which come hand in hand with education, they had to sit back and fend for themselves with limited devices at hand. Confined within the corners of their home, they had only their home to go about, nothing more. The ambience of schools was lost. The teachers seemed to be far, far away from them. But thank God, what remained with them was the online mode of education. But then, was I guess the answer is and might be a big no. Because schools, colleges, or universities, for that matter, are a different set of things. They are something which are much more than that brick and mortar kind of a thing, that brick and cement kind of a thing. They are the torch bearers. They are the temples of education. Since everything was affected, they remained. They remained there without that humdrum, that gaiety, that what we call it, that conviviality of the students. So that's what came to be known as a lockdown, a moral, physical, social, ethical standstill, a place, a position, a state, a status where nothing seemed to be going our way. Now, coming to the important point of remedial teaching vis-a-vis COVID-19 and its importance. I think without going any further, I would request my colleague and in charge remedial coaching and remedial teaching cell, Government Degree College, Pulwama, Professor Dr. Ashok Sandar Saab, to please take over the microphone from me and start his presentation, start his valuable comments about the remedial coaching and its necessity. And without actually taking much of your time, I must also breathe in here that we have made it a kind of a system which is married to that earlier system of that podium, that platform wherein a speaker would leave place for one more speaker. And we believe in the anecdote that old order yields place for new. But here it's not old order or new order. Here it's a person leaving place for a person. And I leave place for Professor Dr. Ashik Hussain Darsab. He's Assistant Professor, Department of History, and at the same time, he is our in charge of the remedial teaching in the college. Dr. Ashik Hussain.
Thank you, Jan Saab. Respected colleagues and dear students, Professor Jan Saab briefed us about the importance of remedial teaching. And during this lockdown, the challenge which has been thrown up by the COVID-19. So I will speak about the concept of remedial teaching and significance of remedial teaching and the principles which are to be followed in the remedial teaching. The word remedy means to rectify, to improve, or to provide remedy for something. And remedial teaching is intended to improve the academic capacities of the students. This is an additional support which is given to the students who are lagging behind, who need support because of the poor academic performance or due to some other reason who do not catch up the pace with the normal classes. Those students need some further support. So remedial teaching is provided for those students because education is not only to nurture the excellence in the gifted students, but it is also to uplift the students who are not so gifted. Since student community constitutes of, it is constituted of, it is a heterogeneous group, and there are diverse academic capabilities of the students. They come from different backgrounds, they have different learning abilities, and teacher has to recognize this diversity. There is also a neo-Marxist critique to the modern education system. Neo-Marxists say that in the modern education system, the children of the upper classes, they are having familiarity with the curriculum in the preschool period. Their family environment is providing them that familiarity, whereas the children from the poor economic background, they completely find themselves in an alien environment when they join the schools. And then naturally the students from the upper class background, they excel in that education system, and then examination system is put in place to eliminate the poor students, and this way they are denied the opportunities of education, and similarly they are then denied the opportunities to improve their economic status. But our education system has largely addressed this issue, because you'll find in the UGC guidelines this remedial teaching program is largely, it is designed for the students of the backward classes, SC, ST students and OBC students. There is also the quota for the open category, general category students also. But largely our education system has addressed this problem of looking into the educational needs of the students from the poor background. We will not go into that detail, but what is important here for us, the students who are lagging behind, who have fallen behind, or who fail to catch up the pace with the normal students, it is important for the teacher to recognize this diversity. It becomes important for the teacher to recognize that students are having diverse academic potentialities, and he has to address the students accordingly, according to their academic potentialities. He has to recognize that there are the students who do not catch up the pace with the normal students in the class. Therefore, for those students, he has to give a special attention. They need a special attention, they need a special education. But this should not be confused with the special education. Special education is a separate concept. Special education is intended for those students with special potentialities. But you may be having the students who are otherwise normal, both normal students and those students who are slow in learning. Because sometimes normal students who are otherwise bright, who are otherwise having very good academic performance, but sometimes they do miss classes due to one or other reason, due to one problem or another problem. In our state, we often have certain problems due to which our students do not, they sometimes do miss the classes. And in order to compensate that academic loss, then those students are joining the remedial classes. So in remedial classes, we can have both students who are catching up the pace with the normal students, and as well as we are having the students who are with slow learning or who have certain learning problems. Therefore, the purpose of remedial teaching is to develop a technique that will, we have to, in remedial teaching, a technique has to be developed that will help in rectifying the errors in learning. So learning errors have to be rectified in the remedial teaching. Now, for the remedial teaching, what becomes important what becomes important for the teacher is that he has first to identify the weak students. The first step, what the teacher is doing, he is first identifying the weak students. Then he has to evaluate the students, because he has to identify those students with slow learning. If there are problems with the student, some of the students are having the learning problems, but teacher has to identify first those students. He can cure, he can provide remedy only once he will find who are the students who need this remedy. So for that matter, first challenge before the teacher in the remedial teaching is that he has first to identify the student. So first step in teaching, normal teaching, is that teacher is teaching, he is teaching. Then he has to identify the students. For identifying the students, he has to evaluate the students. So after evaluating, he will find out that few students in the class, these are not having these students in the class, they are having learning problems, they do not catch up the pace. After that, he has to see what problems they do have. So in this evaluation and assessment process, he has to ascertain two things. One, first is that he has to identify the students with slow learning. Second, he has to identify their problems. What problems do those students have? And third thing is that then after identifying the problems, he will go for reteaching. He will design his teaching pedagogy. Then after, he will go for reteaching and he will address those needs of the students. Now, how a teacher will evaluate the students? The challenge before a teacher is that how he will evaluate students, how he will identify what are the problems of the students. So for this, there are now certain tests for the students. There is Woodcock-Johnson's test. There is Gray oral reading test. These tests are designed for mostly for the small children, and those small children are tested through these mechanisms, through these tests. Their learning assess the students. He will evaluate the students according to his own wisdom. Therefore, after evaluating the students, teacher has to provide the remedy. He has to see whether the student is having the problem in memory, either he's having the memory problem, whether he is having a reading problem, or whether he is having reasoning problem, whether he is having problem solving problem. So these are whether he's having emotional problem. All these things have to be ascertained by the teacher through certain designated tests or through certain tests which he can develop out of his own wisdom. At college level, it is suggested that quizzing is one of the method. Quizzing is one of the tests that through which teacher can evaluate. This way he is not only evaluating the student, he is also evaluating his own teaching. How far his teaching has been successful in benefiting the student. Because the purpose of education system, the purpose of teaching is not only to transfer the knowledge. The purpose of teaching is to benefit the student. The purpose is to improve the student, improve the standard of the student. Therefore, teacher, while evaluating the student, is not only evaluating the student, rather he is evaluating his own teaching. He is evaluating himself also, that how far his teaching is successful. Therefore, after evaluating the student, teacher will identify the weaknesses, and accordingly he will provide remedy to the students. He will design his teaching accordingly, and he will provide remedy to the students. He will redesign his teaching for improving the quality, for improving the learning capacity of the students. Then another important aspect of the remedial teaching is feedback mechanism. From elementary level to the college level, best remedial teaching programs include feedback mechanism. Feedback mechanism is very important for education system, particularly in teaching. Lieutenant Governor of JNK-UT in a recent conference on new education policy quoted R.W. Emerson saying that the secret of education lies in respecting the student. And he also focused on making feedback mechanism part of the education system. Now, respecting the student means to teach the student the way he wants us to teach, not the way we want him to learn. We have to teach the student the way he wants us to teach. We have to address the needs and requirements of the student. Once we collect the feedback from the students, then teacher will see that what are the requirements of the student, what are the needs of the student, what is the standard of the student. Because what happens, I have seen generally sometimes it happens that a teacher who is having PhD or who has qualified net, who has given 10, 7 years to the subject, then he is going to the class with full preparation, reading so many good authorities on the subject, reading high concept, standard concepts for the subject. Then he is going to the class with full preparation and expecting the students will accept, they will understand his lecture. But in that situation where students are not having their standard up to the mark to understand those big concepts and big theories on a particular subject, in that way the teacher's education, his all that competence, his all that intelligence and ability and hard work, that is not benefiting the student, because student is not having that level, they do not have that standard to understand the teacher. Therefore, in this situation, it becomes necessary for the teachers to collect the feedback from the students and work on that. Once a teacher gets feedback from the student, then he comes to know that what is the level of my student, what is the standard of my student, and the teaching, what kind of the what standard my teaching should be. So accordingly, he designs the teaching, and he provides he teaches the student, he provides remedy to the student, And this way it helps us in improving the standard, in improving the quality, and in improving the learning capacity of the student. Feedback mechanism helps the student in many ways. First, it helps it helps in solving the problems that arise in teaching. Second, it encourages the student, it develops confidence in the student, because once once we know the problems of the student, once the student feels that his problems are addressed by the teacher, whatever the problem he has, teacher is teaching him according to his requirements, naturally it develops confidence in the student. Naturally it improves the quality of the student. Therefore it becomes very important for the teacher to collect the feedback from the students. Another thing is that it develops the confidence, or it helps in overcoming the emotional difficulties of the student. Naturally, when teach student is taught according to his desire, according to his requirement, according to his wish, it helps him to overcome the emotional difficulties. Because I will speak about it later also, because sometimes why these emotional difficulties, emotional problems are important, because sometimes the problem is not within the student, it is outside also, it is in the context also. Sometimes student feels emotionally disturbed, but once the student feels that the teacher is there for him, he is there to attend, he is there to address his requirements, he is there to address his needs, that way it helps him in overcoming the emotional difficulties. Then therefore this feedback mechanism is very important, and very important for effective teaching as well as for effective remedial teaching. It provides a comfort level between the teacher and the student, and it leads to more rewarding and more positive results. Then there are certain principles which are to be followed in remedial teaching. In remedial teaching, once teacher is teaching, he is providing the remedial teaching. It becomes necessary for him that he has to follow certain principles. Because if he directly goes for reteaching, then it is not to be called the remedial teaching. Neither it is benefiting the student anyway. This has to be understood by teacher, this has to be understood by all students also, that remedial teaching is not something that it is not like reteaching. There is a difference between this remedial teaching and reteaching. Purpose of knowledge, purpose of teaching is not only transferring knowledge in the class. We are transferring knowledge in the class to the students, and once we feel that this knowledge, there are certain students who have not been able to grasp it, okay, let us transfer it again. It is not like that. So for this is completely a different thing, because once we are transferring knowledge, we are identifying the poor students, we are identifying the students with poor learning capacities. And this poor learning capacity, it should not be labeled with negative connotation that this is a remedial student and this is a student with poor learning capacity. And neither the student with poor learning capacity will always remain in that category. He can be improved, and he will then be part of the general and normal classroom. This can be done because for a long it was considered that the students with remedial, these students were labeled as remedial. It was having a sort of a negative connotation. Now this thing has been removed. This negative label has been removed, because now it has been realized, largely it has been realized, that the purpose is not to transfer the knowledge, but the purpose is to improve the quality of the student. Once the quality of the student is improved, this does not become important there, how that you are given a remedial teaching or it is negative connotation does not matter once the quality of the student is improved. Therefore, for improving the quality of the student, for improving the academic capacity of the student, it is important for the teacher to follow certain principles in the remedial teaching. Means he has to follow a procedure. He should be well trained for the remedial teaching. It is completely different than his first teaching, than his first normal teaching. Now, what are the principles which are to be followed by a teacher in the remedial teaching. The first thing is that in the remedial teaching, teacher has to motivate the student. He has to generate interest among the students. Now, how this interest would be generated? Because once you see that students are not learning properly, students are having poor learning capacities, there may not be one problem. As I said earlier, that there may be memorizing problem, there may be reading problem, comprehension problem, language problem. There may be different kinds of the problems which students do face. Therefore, in order to generate the interest, in order to motivate the students, what the teacher has to do, he has to see where the problem is. The teacher has to generate, unless the student is not in between the, okay. If any student is having a question, he can ask a question in between the lecture also. So we will continue the talk, and if any student is having any question in between, he can ask it. So I was talking about the interest. Unless the student is not having interest in learning, he will not learn anything. Therefore, this is a duty of the teacher. Teacher has to completely engage himself in it. He has to do a research why the student is not having interest, why the student is not motivated. Because it generally happens when certain students are having the poor learning capacities, what happens with them, that they gradually they lose interest in learning. If student is if a student is having any problem, when he is having the learning problem, he feels that he is not able to catch up the pace with the normal students. Slowly and gradually he loses the interest, he loses the motivation, and actually he goes out of the system. Therefore, yes, therefore a teacher must motivate the student first. He must completely look into it, that where is the problem, why students don't have interest in, why students are not having the interest, why students are not motivated. He has to look into that. Second thing is the teaching preparation. These two things that I was speaking about, the interest and the teaching preparation, these are interrelated. Interrelated in the sense, as I said, that the teacher has to do the research first. Teacher has to, because as I earlier I said that this is different from the reteaching or the normal teaching. Now teacher is knowing that there are the problems, there is any specific problem, or there are general problems with the students. Now he has to make a preparation according, he has to devise strategy. He has to devise the strategy according to the needs of the student. He has to underline those problems which the students are having in the general class. Then his new preparation, that should be according to the that preparation, then that should be according to the interests of the students, that should be according to the requirements of the students. He has to frame strategy also. For that, a specific strategy has to be framed, what will overcome the learning difficulties of the students, or if not overcome complete learning difficulties of the students, at least that thing will, at least if that will not completely overcome the learning difficulty, at least that will minimize the learning difficulties of the student. So that the teacher has to make a preparation. He has to redesign his pedagogy so that learning problems of the students are addressed and learning problems of the students are minimized. Another important principle which is to be followed in remedial teaching is he has to encourage the student participation. Generally, what happens in teaching the students with the poor academic performance, they do not ask questions, they become shy, and they do not participate in this learning process. And this way they are lagging behind. But here, for enhancing the confidence of the student, for engaging the student, teacher has to encourage his participation in the learning process. Once he is giving remedial teaching to the students, he has to engage him, he has to encourage his participation by way of giving assignments to the students. He can create peer support group, so that So by creating the peer support group, he can also this way, by creating peer support group, he can encourage the participation. He can help the student in developing interpersonal relationship. Students can develop interpersonal relationship also. This way they can develop the skill of cooperation among them, and they can also help each other. So in remedial teaching, teacher has to encourage the student participation. Then another important thing, which has to be another important principle, which has to be followed in remedial teaching, that is the teacher has to design a meaningful environment. As I said, that sometimes the problem is not there within the student, but problem is within the context. The problem is in the environment. Therefore, teacher has to ensure that a conducive environment is a conducive learning environment is provided to the student, so that it helps him to overcome the so this way, a teacher should provide a meaningful environment to the student, so that conducive environment to the student, so that it becomes easy for the student to understand. Teacher has to see whether there isn't any problem within the classroom, whether student is not feeling comfortable in the classroom, or whether there isn't any problem within the environment in which I am teaching. So he has to analyze, he while doing the research on the teaching of the students, on his teaching pedagogy, teacher has to look into the totality. He has to see whether there isn't any problem in the environment. Therefore, it becomes necessary for the teacher in remedial teaching to provide a friendly environment, to provide a conducive environment for learning. Then another important thing is that teacher has to design his teaching material. He can use textbooks, or he can devise the material according to the needs of the student. He can devise different type of study material for different categories of students. If there are some bright students in the class, for them he can have one category, one sort of material, one standard of material, or for these poor learners he can have another sort of material. I said that this should not be, again I'm speaking about this because I used the word poor learner. It should not be labeled as negatively as poor learner. This is that certain students at some point of time may need remedial teaching, but they do come out of this category and they will be then placed in among the normal students, or at times the bright students may also need the remedial teaching. Therefore, this negative connotation of the word poor student, or the student with the poor performance, student with a poor academic performance, should be done away with. It should not be kept labeled with it. So a meaningful study material, once the student is the teacher is working, once the teacher is doing research on his teaching pedagogy, he must ensure that a good teaching material is provided. Teaching material is provided to particularly to these students who are provided remedial teaching in these remedial classes, and needs of these students who need remedial teaching. Then, so the teaching material becomes important during the remedial teaching. He has to design a good teaching material for this, and a good teaching material is to be provided to the students of different categories, and particularly to the students who are being given the remedial teaching. For them, he may need to redesign the teaching material according to their own design, according to their own requirements. Then during the teaching, particularly during the remedial teaching, teacher has to develop generic teacher has to develop the generic skills. Teacher has to develop the generic teaching skills of the student. In remedial teaching, a teacher has to focus on the generic skills of the student. He should develop communication skill. He should develop language proficiency. He should develop the skill of interpersonal relationship. He should develop communication skill. He should develop skill of cooperation. So teacher has to focus on the generic skills of the student. Then another important thing is that teacher has to develop the has been maintaining the practice of conducting remedial classes for providing the academic support, additional support to the students who were lagging behind or who are having the problems in teaching or who missed the classes due to one or another other reason. This college was effectively conducting the remedial classes. Now COVID-19 has thrown up challenge, as Jan Saab was also speaking in earlier, that COVID-19 thrown up a challenge for us, and then we started online Google classes. Online we shifted to online learning thanks to the modern technology that we were able to conduct the classes, mainstream classes, through online platform. Then with this COVID-19, it has it has thrown up few opportunities also for us. So for this remedial teaching, under the patronage of our worthy principal, we have started online Google classes, online Google remedial teaching Google classes for our students, those students who are having learning problems or who missed the classes or who need any additional support. They can connect to they can connect to their teachers through the Google class. Google class is a platform where the students will connect with their teachers. Then teacher can use apps. He can use other teaching apps like Google Meet is there, Zoom application is there, or any other application, other teaching application he can use. He can use to reach to the student, to improve the quality of the student, to improve the academic capability of the student. So this way the college has again initiated the program of remedial teaching. In this context, I am advising all the students who feel any need for additional support, for additional teaching support, they can join this program, and they will connect to their teachers. We have circulated it on the FB page and on the website. You can see on FB page and the website Google class codes for every subject. In particularly in arts and sciences subjects, we have started these Google classes, and their students can join the Google classes, then connect to their teachers who will help them. So I am advising the students to take optimum benefit of this program. Thank you very much. Now, students, if anybody is having any question, any query, he can ask.
Students can raise their hands and ask questions. We could directly go to them by way of letting them in, unmuting them. If you have questions, you can. So I request all of you, if you have questions, please ask. You can also type in the questions in the chat box and we will put the question through to Dr. Ashif sir.
Uh,
Well, we have to also conventionally follow certain steps. SOPs have to be in place. We are in a college. Our college is, I think we cannot still use word was. It is a COVID center and COVID rehabilitation center. So to say, in tight and strict terms, it's a COVID hospital where we have patients, positive patients, COVID positive patients. So they are in fact treated here. So by one way or the other, the college is facing a challenge of imparting education at a time when everything seems out of way. And we don't arrogate to ourselves this prized position that we are at a vantage point or we are at a certain point where we only offer education in the times when we are faced with a huge challenge, a gargantuan challenge of COVID-19. Every institution faces this, and every institution has been for quite some time now facing this. But then, is remedial coaching or is remedial teaching a remedy? That is the point. And remediation, in its definition, doesn't mean a student misses out on something important in a class and a teacher arranges for him some more classes to just make good the loss. Remediation also happens to be that something is missed out on the previous class or missed out on in the previous class, and we tend to make good that loss in the coming or in the following class. For example, a student in the secondary classes misses out on something important, and then the same student tries to make good this loss when he steps into some college or steps into his what we call as his college days, or he steps into his college life. There he expects his teachers to be extra bit or more so talented, qualified, skilled, to the extent that they will make good the loss. So challenges are many and varied. But then how does the remediation or how does the remedial coaching become too very important in the times when online systems or online educational fora and platforms have created a certain kind of a divide, a remarkably has to be in commas, because we, from one side, we boost off digitizing and keeping everything for a student on an online platform, and now he feels that, and we feel as the policymakers, we feel he's now only a click away from the whole repertoire and whole season of knowledge. The whole treasure trove of knowledge is now a click away. But that's not a reality everywhere. Students are faced with a problem of, first of all, getting a handset into their hands, and a poor student faces a double whammy. He is always, and he feels supplanted because of the fact that technology is not so very easily accessible to him. He cannot get a handset. For him, a handset is a privilege. It's a luxury. It's not a luxury for him only, it's a luxury for his family. Where we are a point where we are cribbing and bitching about the ramshackle school buildings, the poor educational setup, the poor infrastructural base. Schools are quite nicely set up on papers and they are nowhere on ground. The buildings have sagged, if at all they are somewhere. How can we boost off digitizing, keeping our educational system online 24/7? So here, remediation takes a different kind of meaning. Remediation puts on a different kind of contours, puts on different kind of clothes. It comes in a different way to us. We have to pull the students who are suffering at the hands of this digital divide, they have to be brought out from that. And recently a survey was done by, which I was going through just an hour before, a survey was done by Long and Boatman in US. They say that remediation becomes important for the fact because something is missed out by a student in graduation. He expects his university classes to be that way, accessible to be that way, fine and to be that way, university teachers to be that way qualified for him so as to make good the loss and so as to make him quite equipped to the challenges, quite skilled for the challenge which he's going to face ahead. And remediation also becomes important, as Boatman and Long said, that remediation becomes important because a student is not that way lucky to get a platform in his life so that he would learn certain good skills for his life. So what does he do is that he expects, if at all he monetarily is benefited from somewhere, or he is socially mobilized, he feels now he has money, or his parents have started earning, or money is coming from any quarter, he feels that he can now have access to better education. He goes to a different platform, or he so to say, he tries to attend to, or tries to take admission into a wonderful or into a better platform so that his loss is made good. So that way remediation also becomes important. But making you aware of the realities that we face right now would be about a situation that is, so to say, ubiquitous. We feel it here, you might also be feeling it, the teachers in you might also be feeling it somewhere. The problem lies with the fact that COVID-19 has, as I said, has confined us to our rooms back home, and a teacher is somewhere a phantom presence. I have seen students join online classes and then keeping themselves joined in, or keeping themselves in a joining mode, then they roam around. The teacher there as a single transactor of business, whose presence used to be overwhelming in the class, who used to be a huge presence in the class. His swagger was something that would send shivers down the spine of students, is now a phantom presence. The teacher is only felt, not seen. If seen, not felt. So that way, remedial teaching takes a different turn again. If you ask your kids back home, or your younger lot back home, that do they feel they are some way what we call as enlightened, or some way they have learned something out of this online experience? I'm sure in my case, if I am asked, I may not take it as you may not take it as a sweeping statement, but I may take it as a reality somewhere, that I may say no. For the fact, because you still wait for those offline classes, that when should the day come, or when would that day come? That day should someday come, that we would talk to our teacher and ask these, and make rather pan out these confusions. So that way remedial classes here also become important, and remedial classes would be that actual classwork that COVID-19 has actually kept us away from. So to say, that remedial teaching that way also takes a different turn as well. And now moving to the point of how remedial, as Ashik said, that COVID-19 has thrown up challenges, and everybody, and you unanimously agree with the fact that what we used to be before COVID-19 as a teacher, and what I used to be as a teacher, what teachers used to be before COVID-19, they have started thinking now on different terms, because the whole game plan has changed. COVID-19 has thrown up such a huge challenge, such a gargantuan challenge on our doorstep, that we are no way the same what we used to be, and we have to fine tune ourselves to the call of the time. There, a remedial teaching for a teacher, remedial training for a teacher becomes important. And recently we were in a webinar in this college, and one of the learned resource persons, Sayyid Humayun Kaisar, said he minced no words about saying that we have been pitchforked into this online mode. Pitchfork to the extent that till yesterday nobody knew what online is, and nobody would marry himself to the fact that you have to be part of this online exercise somewhere. And nobody even knew that this COVID-19 crisis is coming with a kind of a different game plan, that everybody would have to change himself to the extent that one would have to think about himself that whether he was sane or not. So remedial teaching for or remedial training for a teacher has also become a livable necessity. And it's no wonder that we see now teachers being taken, or teachers being rather handpicked, gauging their talents and myriad proclivities. They are picked up from their original positions, and the training is being organized for them. Training schedules are being charted out for them so that they are fully equipped. Their remedial training and remedial teaching are some way, they crisscross. They crisscross to the extent that a teacher himself feels ill-equipped to the extent that he has to now use Zoom, he has to use WebEx, he has to use Google Meet, and even if he knows these platforms today, tomorrow he may have to use some different platforms and fora. So that way, remedial training has also become a reality. And their students, their participants, it's also important to mention that in our case, the teacher who faces it at the closest quarters, because he has the first interface with the students, we feel that in these 6-7 months, students feel that they haven't learned anything. Anything may be a huge word for a teacher who has taught or who has been to online platforms for all these months, and yet his students will today clamor for the repetition of the same subject or same topic or same topics which he has been teaching all these months through. I think this should not come in as a jolt to us or as a wonder to us. This is a reality that we have to marry ourselves, that we have to accept hands down, for the fact that we were not ready, or we had to be ready to the extent that we were receiving a constant pounding from behind. Hey, you cannot get away from this. You have to, as a teacher, you have to have this. And I request honorable participants, we have participants from Jammu, we have Dr. Sushma Balla. She says, good morning to one and all, very informative session. Dr. Sushma Balla is from Government College of Education. Dr. Sushma, welcome to the webinar. And we have many participants. If at all anybody has question, he can ask us to unmute him or her. We straight away unmute him and he can ask a question. If students have questions, we have many students who are here. They can ask the questions and they can be part of this webinar that way as well. And we have not shared the feedback. We'll share the feedback after Principal Sir is done with his that what we call as welcome address that should have been right in the beginning. But as I said, Principal Sir was hard pressed for time. He had some meeting lined up at an unavoidable place. So that way we couldn't get him to the webinar. But then we will again move to Principal Sir and ask him to share his private comments about us. And yes, let's continue. I just wanted to check in if students have questions or participants have questions, and we can in fact answer the questions vis-a-vis remedial coaching. Now, as I was talking about Long and Boatman, I quote, say that traditionally developmental education has intended to address whatever was missed in high school education. The general purpose of these remedial courses was to provide academically underprepared, I quote the words, underprepared students with the skills they need to succeed in college and in labor market. That's the point which I wanted to take up. In US, the remedial classes and remedial coaching was organized only for the students who wanted to do something midway, something, as I said, en passant, passingly to the extent that they had colleges, they were in colleges, but they wanted to step out of colleges someday, and they wanted to be skilled to the extent that they would earn for themselves so that their education doesn't suffer. I think it was back in 2015-16, and the survey came out in 2020. Our government, thank God, has woken up to the challenge, and this new education policy, NEP 2019 or 2020, has come out with this point that students have to be skilled. Thank God we had certain things in place before as well, but this education policy has unequivocally came out with the agenda that students have to be handed out diplomas in the first year, degrees after completing the second years, and again degrees after third year or fourth year. So that way they would be somewhere skilled. Think about a graduate student who has completed 2 years of graduation. He is still away from calling himself a graduate, only for that 1 year he is yet to pass. So a 12th pass student after 2-3 years is not able to say himself that he is about to complete graduation till the time he completes it. So remedial coaching for them, for Long and Boatman, as I was quoting, was for them extra coaching, not only making good the loss which students suffer, but extra coaching. Here remedial coaching or remedial teaching, it takes a different meaning. That teaching student certain skills which he or she feels at a certain level that he should be abreast with. When he self-analyzes, when he self-introspects, he feels that he is lagging behind, he is bereft of certain skills. He feels that somewhere he should get a platform, he should get a teacher, he should get an alma mater where he should be able to make good the loss or get his skills. Either if the skills are there, get the skills refurbished or learn these skills somewhere. So that way, that becomes remedial teaching becomes. But in our case, if we talk about the realities back home, the realities in Jammu and Kashmir, in UT of Jammu and Kashmir, because that is what we live and what we face. As a teacher, one feels that after having come out from the college, after spending the prime of one's youth in college, a student feels himself at a virtual, not only virtual, at a literal cul-de-sac. He is at a dead end. He has nowhere to go. I think these may sound too big words, or they may sound at times some sweeping statements, but I'm sure that I'm not making them without substantiating them with the realities we are faced with. Yes, a college student feels that literally has been thrown into a morass where he has nowhere to go. He has no way to tread on. And he's at what the famous poet Robert Frost said, that he's at a two-way crossing. But here he is lost in the mosaic of ways. He has no way to go. And it is not for nothing that someone said some years back that we are churning out graduates. We are churning out graduates. We are spouting out graduates. Colleges every year are filled with humongous number of students, and after 3 good years they leave the ramparts of the college only to just wait and wait. Now again, it's a matter of introspection. Are they ill-equipped? Yes. I think gone are the times when a student is handed out a degree and then asked to fend for himself, because the degree doesn't equip him to that level that he would now be the dictator of his own destiny. So a lot needs to be done on the front of remedial coaching. One, to the extent of seeing and rather gauging and introspecting the annals of our syllabi, the content of our syllabi, that does it leave places, does it have do we have chinks in the armor? Where do we need to fix it? One, we have to realize that. Second, we have to see for ourselves that how we can make a strong connect with the students so that the remedial coaching moves away from the mere paperwork and is a reality, a seen and livable reality. Third, doesn't remedial coaching become a part of remedial training for the teachers themselves, so that a teacher is at a vantage point to decide for his students that what he can do and instill a semblance of confidence in his students so that they could go confidently after they finish a certain course and a certain degree or a diploma. I think these things we need to take care of. And I request all the participants, if they have questions, certain hands were raised before, the hands have been put down now. If anybody wants to ask any question, he can sure raise his hand and we'll let him in. And Honorable Principal Sir would be joining us in a moment's time. And Professor Ashik Hussain, in charge remedial cell, have actually gone to principal's office. As I said, I am sharing realities with you because we wanted it to be that amalgam of a virtual webinar meet, and also we didn't want to sever ties with that conventional way. So we wanted to shake hands with the tradition and yet be, what we call as yet be modern in some certain setups. And we have, I think, we have been hurled into a certain setup wherein technology is a dictator. So to say that we are at a certain point wherein one feels that the teacher has lost the meaning. I think that needs to be pondered over. And has the teacher become a kind of a role model for all the students, or has it, because of COVID-19 crisis, has he been reduced again to a virtual presence, and wherein what was expected of him before is not expected of him now? I think these things we need to ponder over. Department of Higher Education has, in its new mandate to the college principals, has, so to say, I said the mandate, they have been vested with certain power to start off small or big, what we call as small or, so to say, long rambling courses, whatever they can do at their own places. They have started certain courses in their colleges which have some marketability, which have some sellable value. I think that I see as a part of remedial teaching, because that way we think that students should also be having this skill once they move or step out of the confines of the college. And it's only in the conclusion that I wanted to put in, and I would, that in US, a student, a kid, right from his nursery classes, I'm not sure whether nursery is called nursery there as well, but they actually give the student certain life skills like swimming, cycling, like driving, etc. At a certain age group is vested with certain skills so that they don't feel any problem in the future course of their life. With these words, we thank all of you for having joined us. We thank Professor Dr. Ashik Hussain for making this webinar a reality by way of presenting his views on this important topic of importance of remedial teaching. We are thankful to Honorable Principal Government Degree College, Pulwama, before everything, to have guided us with his administrative acumen and great stewardship skills. He has been to the forefront and at the forefront of this webinar all through the build-up of this webinar. Principal Sir Professor Farooq Ahmed Andrabi makes it a point that the online events are organized every now and then so as to allow students and participants a certain degree of allowance to share their views vis-a-vis different propositions. And we are all thankful to the members of debate seminar committee, to the members of college remedial cell. I am all thankful to my colleagues in this college who bear with us when it comes to hosting a function. Because of certain things we have to manage by way of keeping ourselves connected seamlessly to our participants. We are thankful to Shahid Sir of Department of BCA, Shahid Nazir, for his technical support all through the webinar. We are so very thankful to the IT cell of the college, to the convener IT committee, Professor Muhammad Iqbal Butt, for his support and for making this webinar a reality by way of live streaming it on our YouTube MIB channel. We are so very thankful to the members, to the professors in our seminar room, Professor Dr. Suhaib Band, Head Department of EVS, Professor Dr. Anisul Mahmood, who is just seated beside me and who made it a point that we do everything maintaining a pin drop silence. I am so very thankful to Dr. Muzaffar Ahmad, Department of Geography, Assistant Professor, Department of Geography, for ensuring that the seminar goes seamlessly on this platform. I'm so very thankful to Dr. Suhail Ahmed from Department of Geography. I call it Geography for a loss of a better pronunciation, that he has been with us and maintained the silence, which otherwise is not part of their game, because they have a first interface, as I said, with the students, and their only talking is the business. But they maintain silence and make this program a reality. And I request all the participants to bear with us, and we will share the feedback form or feedback link in our WhatsApp group. And in that WhatsApp group, you can fill in the feedback form and your certificates would be sent back to your email IDs, registered email IDs. And if you have any views and opinions regarding this webinar, you can mail us on the email IDs given on the poster of the webinar. And we thank all of you for having given us your precious time. And again, I'm all thanks to the college technical committee, to the resource persons of the webinar, and to top it all, to Honorable Principal Government Degree College, Pulwama, Professor Farooq Ahmed Andrabi, for making this webinar a reality. Thank you all. Thank you.